OTB's The Hurling Pod with James Skehill and Paul Murphy.
Tá craobhna here in an eis an Gaillimh. People of Galway, we love you.
I don't want to leave the people of Waterford down, because they're my life, People of Waterford are my life, and I love me county,
We love John Malone.
It's almost like they're afraid to kind of go and hurl and just let themselves express themselves. It's like as if they're nearly afraid to make a mistake, and sometimes you have to make a mistake and just throw off that bit of nervousness and have a go.
Yeah, it's pure constipated hurling.
Welcome along to episode 2 of season 2 of the Hurling Pod. Tipperary have enjoyed their first victory at Kilkenny in the National Hurling League since 2008. Jason Ford scored 1 goal in 15 for the Premier at Nowlan Park. Clare's wait for a win against Limerick is stretched out to 5 years after the All-Ireland champions put 6 points on their neighbours on Saturday night. 8 points from Declan Dalton and 2-3 from Conor Lahan helped Cork continue their impressive start with a 4-point victory at Galway. Dublin had too much for Antrim at Parnell Park, while Waterford and Wexford finished strongly in their games to see off pretty stubborn challenges from both Laois and Westmeath. Delighted that James Skehill and Paul Murphy are here with me. How are you getting on, lads?
How's it going, lads?
Very good, all well.
One of those weekends, James, where I think it was Liam Sheedy who said it after the game, the Limerick-Clare game felt like a 6-point hammering. There were a few margins at the weekend that maybe didn't quite reflect the games themselves because of fightbacks during them. But I guess my takeaway from watching the game on Saturday, Skehill, was that Limerick, even with some of their most important players in the stand, and I take the point that Shane O'Donnell wasn't in with Clare, and we saw Kelly up in the stands, and they don't have Conlon back just yet either. But you look up into the stand and you see Declan Hannon sitting there with Will O'Donoghue. You see that again the minutes are being carefully managed by Kiley when it comes to Hegarty and when it comes to Cian Lynch. And some of their 20s from the last couple of years are just plugging into the system, even without their free takers, no Burns, no Galan. This Limerick train just seems to keep going.
Yeah, and to be honest, like when you watch the game live, you got an overriding feeling that Clare were just miles off Limerick, that Limerick were just playing around them. Like there was no contact on Limerick lads. There was, an immersive amount of shots, which we've become accustomed to now with Limerick, don't get me wrong. But it took, I think it was 18 or 19 minutes for Clare's first score from play. Like Aidan McCarthy was just keeping them within touching distance. And it was 9 points to 1. In terms of points scored after 20 odd minutes, so it was it had the feel of about, if you're watching a soccer game and a team is up 6-0 and another crowd gets 3 goals just to make it look better. That's the way it kind of looked. And I know when you watched it, Ger Canning had mentioned that he said that Brian Lohan would be very happy with the way Clare finished. No he won't. He'd be disgusted with the first 50 minutes of the way that Clare performed. They didn't look sharp. They looked quite lethargic. But then in the opposite of that, Limerick looked very, very sharp. And it looks so sharp that and I mean this with respect now, I don't mean this in a bad way. Your man, was it Houlihan that was taking the frees? Yeah, he potentially won't be in the Limerick squad for championship. That's kind of the level of the calibre of player that Limerick have to come back. Like the guy who pops 12-13 points in a game, 8 at half time, that he mightn't make the squad. So Limerick, I won't say they're building something, they've built something, but they look very, very sharp on a Saturday evening, and Clare have a bit to do.
Yeah, Paul, it was Colin Keys, the journalist, tweeted after the game that he said, and I suppose these comparisons are always going to happen because the run that Limerick are on right now, but he said it reminded him of the Dublin footballers, where Limerick maybe need to find 2 or 3 players, or maybe they need to find just a different option to keep it fresh. But when they bring players in, it seems that the system is able to just keep continuing on.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really what every team in every county is trying to achieve. It's trying to have this team that's really a well-rounded team with 5 or 6 players that during championship you can call in off the bench that are as good as the starters, but at the same time looking at the longer game of every 2 and 3 years reintroducing players into it. And even with that, you see how Limerick are doing it, likes of the Colin Coughlins and these who are getting their nose in just about maybe for championship, not quite there, and then another year comes and they're that bit better. And that's where Limerick are, and you can point to the likes of Dublin teams or even great Kerry teams before, or even the Kilkenny team of the late 2010s. It's that kind of place, and it's the sweet spot that everybody's looking for, because John Kiley at the moment, he has the luxury of putting these other players up in the stands to rest, Declan Hannon and these lads, while dangling a Limerick jersey in front of these younger lads who are mad for blood, and just want to get on the team. So it's ideal. But when you look at the likes of Clares who don't have that depth of a panel, they're having to keep going to the well to try and put out these great performances. And that's, for me, the big message came from this game the other night, was just that Clare needs so much to go right to achieve what they did last year, whereas Limerick can even afford a few things to go wrong and still go and win an All-Ireland. And that's just where they are, you know. But also with that, you know, we weren't talking about Clare this time last year. We weren't speaking about them reaching a Munster final. So, you know, with the players to come back and the likes of Aidan McCarthy and these lads there, you know, there is still, Brian Lowe knows he has to work, but Skehill said it there. I mean, the first 50 minutes, like, they weren't even in the game.
Yeah, I mean, James, you look at this, it was very similar to the Cork game in that it was 16 scores to 8 at half time. In this case, there was the Clare goal from Galvin, which brought them to 1-7 by comparison to the 8 points that Cork had. The difference to last week, though, was that Limerick didn't let up after half time. Like, I think it was 56 minutes into the game, they had 25 points on the board. The game was effectively dead at that point. Yeah. There was definitely a relentlessness that maybe wasn't there in Páirc Uí Chaoimh the week before. Even in the space of a week, they stepped it up a bit.
Yeah, I think if you talk to any sportsman and even listen to the Super Bowl last night where the losing quarterback says you either win or you learn, and I think when you look back at Limerick last week, they don't have to learn an awful lot, but I think anything they learned from last week was, you know, finish every game 70 minutes, go hammer and tongs for 70 minutes. And they look at it was a mixture of Cork doing well last week and obviously Limerick taking the foot off the gas a small bit, but they certainly didn't do it this weekend. And like they shot 127, I think it was, with again a whole host of wides. So they've got they're spoiled. To be honest, they're spoiled. They've got, you know, huge, big, strong men who can cover ground. Again, we saw the last day, Lynch, Houlihan, Hegarty. How many times do we see them behind their own 65, 45, even further back, and then they can transition up so fast. They've got a fabulous hurling IQ, you know, and when you mix that with probably a management team they're probably trying to find ways to keep it. I think fresh is probably the wrong word, but I do wonder for teams that get an awful lot of success, do they kind of stagnate a small bit? So he's probably trying to keep that rejuvenation in the panel. And when we spoke about the youth, like we haven't even seen Conor O'Neill this year, we haven't seen Aaron Gillan, but we've seen Houlihan, we've seen, you know, Adam English, you know, David Reedy's making a bit more of an impact, you could say. So like they've got a plethora of guys that can take a position, and when that happens, you've got loads of guys pushing, you've got rejuvenation in a team. And then ultimately you've got 30, 35 guys heading in the one direction. So they're a dangerous animal. We all know that. And they're, as when we refer to our power rankings later on, they're number one by a large margin.
Yeah, like the thing about it is, Murph, when it comes to some of the roles here. So again, Kyle Hayes was from a deeper position and he was getting forward and he got 3 points during the game. I couldn't help but note with Hegarty's role as well that maybe he's been influenced that, right, we're not going to puck the ball in quite as much as they did before. But Hegarty now has the freedom to come back out a bit if he feels like it. He can go a bit further forward if he wants. And like he was incredibly effective throughout the game.
Yeah, he was. And it's interesting even seeing, like you're saying, Kyle Hayes. Like you just don't know of a given day where John Kiley might actually play Kyle Hayes. But the luxury that he has is, you think it likes himself and Gerard Hegarty, the two lads you mentioned there. And I'd say John Kiley just says to Gerard Hegarty, you go where you want. You're a smart player. Do what you want. And inevitably, every team will have somebody trying to follow Gerard Hegarty. And I say trying to follow him there because he finds the space. But when he creates space then for the likes of Kyle Hayes and these to go running then straight down, because people presume, it's going to be Hegarty coming at us. Hegarty can come deep then out towards midfield, out towards the half back line. Suddenly there's space. And now what we see the other night is Cian Lynch standing there, being the playmaker, popping the ball, because everybody's distracted by Cian Lynch as well, that he's back now and he's winning ball. So there's just this, there's so many angles here that teams are having to deal with, and you have to be so smart to deal with them, because if you think you want to go out and you're going to mark Gerard Hegarty, and if we keep him quiet, Limerick are quiet. Not at all. Like, you're going to have the likes of Kyle Hayes and these lads shooting through, and then particularly Cian Lynch, when you see him the other night, just what he brings to that forward line. And another fellow we didn't even mention, I mean, Peter Casey back the other night. And the one thing I often think of him is just the tackling he brings. Like, he's probably the best tackling forward that they have, which is no insult to the rest of them. He's just really good at it and loves that work. And he got through a huge amount of it. And we all look at the scoreboard and see all the great scores that went up, but look at the amount of balls that he just broke up and just stopped, you know, not letting Clare come out with it. Even if it's this flick that I get and I don't win the ball, but another player wins it. This thankless work that gets through. The likes of him then working away. So you could look at any corner really of this Limerick team and just go look at how exceptional each player, like what they just bring to that team. And Hegarty's role at the moment, it very much just seems to be that go where you want to go, create that space, use your brain, and he just pops up then when you think he might be in a game, he just pops back in and gets on a run, you know. So he's just I mean, he has the freedom of the pitch, and he's just so dangerous when he's like that.
And like, I think he plays centre back for his club, St Patrick's.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
So like, if you can take, I mean this now. You could take the 6 forwards in Limerick and put them in the 6 backs. And they'd be comfortable. That's the thing you see. An awful lot of counties, you can take the forwards and bring them back to the fin, but they wouldn't be comfortable in a systematic perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's why you've got the Barry Nash, the Kyle Hayes. These guys are just... Declan Hannon, where did he start for Limerick? Was it full forward, centre forward?
The forwards, yeah. So Richie English as well, sure.
Yeah, so their hurling IQ is just above everybody else, and they can play anywhere in the 15 spots. Even Nicky Quaid was made his debut in midfield.
Yeah.
In 2010 versus Galway, and I think he plays outfield for Effin. Maybe not now, he's getting a bit older. But, they have natural stickmen that can play anywhere.
And there's an understanding there as well between the players. Like, you see some of the scores that they got, I think was the goal as well, where just flick over the shoulder and a clean run through. But those passes can only come when there's an understanding that as you're about to get to the ball, there's someone running off the shoulder. And like, even though it looks like chaos at times, the Limerick players know what's happening, and they know there's always a support runner. And that's another thing. How do you deal with that? Even when you think it's chaos on the pitch, it's not. They know what's happening.
Yeah, that's one of the things I found, James, particularly in the second half. All right, there was a lot of long shooting from Limerick, and maybe without Galan posting himself in close to the square, they're less likely to let the ball in long as maybe they did last year. But they were consistently looking to work it. And even if that means that they're in tight spaces inside their own half, you can argue maybe about the legitimacy of some of the hand passes. It definitely felt like they're not being clamped on as much as they were last year. I saw definitely some of the
last year, true. Last year, true. It's not anymore.
Will, that was the PC way of explaining it. I'll say it the country way, right?
Go on, you said the country. I don't want to be hounded for this, so you go on.
The hand pass has gone to shite again, okay? because last year it was the big topic. Every ref was pulling it 2 or 3 times a game. It's just gone now. Yeah. And I mean this. He's a fabulous player, but Cian Lynch was throwing the ball. He's just throwing it, popping it out And it happened in a number of games I saw over the weekend. So to start off, to answer your question, hand passes is gone. It's out the door. Yeah, we may as well just get rid of it, but to answer your question, particularly in the first half when the game was still of high energy and kind of intense, you could say, Limerick were just so comfortable. But it's their execution. As I know, we keep saying you can have all the systems in the world, and you can have all the tactics and all the training done, but they execute at such a high level that Clare couldn't touch them. It was like you get the sense at times that Limerick would have 20 guys at the pitch and Clare at 15, because they were able to work the ball so well. And what they did so well is, what I noticed is, when Clare would press them, they would use the Clare press to get around them, if that makes sense. So Clare would press up, next thing they'd pop a ball this way, another way, and next thing the 2 Clare defenders are just gone. Because they bring on the press, then they play triangles around you, and next thing you know, they're gone again. They just do it so well and so efficiently. And it's because obviously they've trained at a very, very high level, but the level of player they have, I keep referring to it, it's just so high that they can execute this game plan under intense pressure. And I do believe if you had 2 or 3 extra, honestly, hand on heart, 2 or 3 extra Clare guys on the pitch, they'd still be able to execute at a serious high level that you wouldn't think they'd miss a beat.
And how disappointed, Murph, will Clare be with the lack of scores from play? Because they go from minute 19 to minute 54 without scoring from play. Like, they were so reliant on the Aidan McCarthy freeze to just keep the scoreboard ticking over at all. Now, they scored 1-5 late on, and look, they looked dangerous with some of the ball that they put in, and Reedy took his goal particularly well when he got in behind. But aside from that, there's a whole half an hour that goes by there where Clare are not even threatening from play.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a few indicators, and we often, we look for them here when we're going, well, what's a sign that a team aren't being creative? And last week we were talking about Galway and Wexford, and, Wexford just not responding to Galway when they knocked over 10 points. Similar enough here, Clare have to recognise we're not scoring from play here. We need to at least be creating the chances. And even if Brian Lohan after this game looked back and he said, you know what, you didn't score for 5 minutes there, but then we got a score, and all these different things. But to go that period without scoring from play, there's something there. And now it is he'll be able to identify it fairly easily in terms of, look, we weren't supporting in the play. When a player was taking a shot from a wrong angle, he can look at it in many different ways. But regardless, that's too long of a period. If you think you're going to be competitive and do that, of course you can't. And I don't think anybody would think that. But certainly Brian Lohan will be looking at that going, I need the answers I need to find as to why we were so flat or why we weren't creative. He could find it in that period. Because if you're not scoring for play there, I mean, there's obviously a good few things wrong. And I think Brian Lohan and the Clare lads would even be a little bit happier if, Limerick were just better than us and we were creating chances and maybe we didn't take a few. But something like that, you can't forgive, you know. So I think the likes of Brian and management, they look at that period and they'll just say, what did we do wrong, or what didn't we do that we couldn't score from play during this period? And to be relying on frees during that time, you know, it's just unforgivable. You can't do it against a team like Limerick.
Yeah, like, because James, you said last week, I wrote it down the sheet here, it's about performance for Clare as opposed to a result, because last year they pushed Limerick on 3 different occasions. Went extra time, didn't go over the line in the Munster Championship, but got a draw in the league and took a draw in the round robin section. So they've proven that when both teams are at their best, they're able to go toe to toe against Limerick. But is there a concern about Clare that maybe Limerick feel like they're a bit further ahead of them this season already?
Yeah, I think like you're looking for. So obviously when they played last year in the championship, that was the best efforts of both teams, and Clare obviously they've shown they can match them. So now you're looking to see, can Clare grow? Can they take another step forward? And that would be by introducing new panel members, more players, to try and achieve more positive result than they had in the semi-final last year. And then the answer, like from the weekend just gone, was, but not yet. You know, not yet. And they did it as you mentioned earlier, with a Limerick team that were missing a good lot of their starters. So the result is one thing, you know, but the manner of result is a different thing entirely. So the manner of result is the performance, and judging by what we saw on Saturday, the performance was pretty poor. Like, but again, we'd often talk about during the league campaigns, we don't know what level of training Clare are doing. Like, are they training 1 night, 2 nights? Were they aiming for this game? Like, were they actually up for it and looking for a win? Part of me would think no, because they seemed kind of to be quite lethargic in the energy levels. That, like, Limerick, to be honest, dominated every single facet, whether it be the physical play, tackling, ball control, aerial ball, rooks, breaks, body language, all of it. Every bit of it, Limerick dominated it all. So I'd say from Brian Lohan, he learned probably more about some of the individuals he has, as opposed to where Clare are going, to be honest. Yeah,
it is difficult to judge, Murph, on this, because we were chatting a bit earlier on. You look at the amount of players who played Fitzgibbon midweek and may well have had heavy involvement with their county the week before. To go out and play 3 important games in pretty quick succession before this little break for the rest of the Fitzgibbon, which is coming up now. There's a heavy workload in quite a few of these young players who are trying to impress at the early stages of the league here.
There is, and that's the thing. Like, those players will never tell you they don't want to play, because for some of them it's their opportunity, you know, to maybe go and grab a jersey for the championship. So for lots of these players, you know, even if they have a little bit of a niggle or the legs are feeling a bit tired, like, you know, and young players, you might be just tired and that might be it. But for an older player, you just wouldn't be able to tolerate that workload. But for these lads, it's very hard to say no. But going out then and playing 3 big matches and one of them being Limerick, that's not easy to do, you know. And I'd have sympathy for players with that, because the schedule at the moment, you know, we're coming off the back of weekends of seeing hurling results, and we're seeing midweek results then in Fitzgibbon, and it's, you know, I don't envy them at all. And you have to admire them in many ways that they're still trying to go and do it, but it's unrealistic as well to expect players to go out and put in an unbelievable performance of a Wednesday night, and then go out of a Sunday morning or a Saturday evening and perform to those levels again. Not sustainable, and not sustainable against players also that might have 3 or 4 more years conditioning under their belts. So there's lots of things there that make it very tough on these Fitzgibbon players. But look, certainly I don't envy the position they're in to try and sustain this level of playing matches, not even week on week, it's every few days.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Skehill, like Evan Nyland particularly, say, put in a lot of minutes over the last week, like where he was very crucial for his college midweek, and also was the free taker and the main man for Galway in the first 2 games of the league. Like, that's a lot of workload on him at this time of year. Yeah,
I think during the week he scored something like 12 points for NUIG. Was that Wednesday or Thursday?
I think it was on Wednesday.
Yeah, and then came along and he played 66 minutes yesterday on, let's be honest, a hard, tough, heavy ground. Like, the Pearse Stadium ground didn't look hectic now, to be honest. So it's not as if we're talking about they're playing in the height of summer. They're in tough ground conditions, and it's hard for him because, like, you know, he plays in a position, particularly in the half forward line midfield, where there's an awful lot of mileage covered, you know, an awful lot of intensity in terms of tackling and look ball. So his legs must be heavy, and like, you don't mind me saying this, but yesterday for portions of the game it looked that way. You know, maybe that maybe it's best for the guy himself if you save him from himself and just give him a break, give him a rest off. You know, now I know there's 2 weeks of a break, you could say, but again, this break period, what are the county teams going to do? Probably just going to put in a serious workload and try to get some mileage built up. And when you look at Evan in particular, Galway are playing Limerick in the next round in 2 weeks, so there'll be intense preparation for that, because you don't want to do. despite what people say about the league and they say about the effectiveness and you know that you don't want to lose 2 games in a row, and you certainly don't want to lose to a Limerick team coming to town. So I'd say there'll be a big shift within 2 weeks. So it needs to be monitored. Like, it's tough on the guys, but again, as Murph said, like if you ask a fellow, do you want to play, he's always going to say yes, unless he gets over 27, 28 years of age. Then he might start thinking differently. But you know, if you're anything from like 19 to 23, you're obviously going to say yes. You want to play every single game, because some of the guys may be worried about their positions in the panel, so they may feel like they're obligated, or they have to make an impression to stake their claim, you know. And again, Evan's going to be an important player for the championship for Galway, so like he just needs to be monitored and minded, in my opinion.
And maybe as well, James, if Conor Cooney was available right now, and if he'd been able to play yesterday, maybe that changes Henry Shefflin's thinking about playing Nowlan. Yeah,
absolutely. Like Conor Cooney has had like, I know we're talking about Evan has had a long month, you could say, but Conor Cooney has had a long 5 or 6 years, because you know Thomas's have won 4 or 5 World Cups titles. They've always been in operation with Galway and Thomas's from January right through to December. Like, so I think he's probably been given enough. has to be given enough time to recuperate, because again, the more than I just said about Evan, he's an extremely important player for Galway, one of our best forwards. So that's the reason you see Evan, you know, taking so many minutes on the pitch. But maybe it offers up a different opportunity for someone else. Like, I didn't think Hurling was going to be taking the frees for Limerick at the weekend, but there he was. So like, let's see if, you know, Liam Collins can take them, or Gavin Lee, or these lads, and just use the league as a platform to see can they execute under pressure.
Right, James, let's go to Salt Hill next then, because this is Cork. I had a feeling you weren't going to enjoy. Look, put it this way, Murph's not going to enjoy when we talk about.
Hang on, my Wi-Fi's going. I gotta go.
And the first half of Nowlan Park at the weekend, that's not going to be nice for him. So that's like a trip to the dentist chair coming up for him as well. But
yeah,
this is Scorefest. Galway 322, Cork 424. Cork have got a real feeling for goals, it would seem, and that proved the difference between the sides. But like, Galway went really well early in this game. Their first 17 shots on target, 15 of them go between the posts, and they were 5 points up inside, I think, the first 15-16 minutes of the game. So what changed after that? Because Galway got the ideal start here.
Well, I think 2 things happened. So number one, I think Galway didn't keep the foot in the throat heavy enough in the first half. Like, they were in the ascendancy for a good lot of the first half, but Cork kept getting these easy scores. You know, like, I love to see it. If a team scores against you, you want to make them really work for it, really, really work for it. So it feels like, you know, a chore to score against you. And they were popping up, you know, with handy points. Declan Dalton got a couple on the terrace side. The first goal, you know, rule number one in your half back line is don't let through your half back line from puck out. You know, the ball has to be stopped there. You cannot let that. Because if you let the ball through your half-back line, that's a serious platform for the opposition. And that was just an easy goal to concede. That was the first thing. So we went in at half-time level with a great scoring efficiency, as you said. Like, we're up on 74% in the first half. It was brilliant, I have to say. Then the second half, there was 5 minutes there of a period where we conceded 2-3. And there was a sending off in the middle of it. And it was a bit chaotic, because I didn't realise Usheen Salmon got sent off for a minute or two. And in that minute or two, Cork scored 1-1. So at that stage, you go from being level to being 8 points down. On a flick of a switch, and then it just became, you know, the harder you try, the worse you do. So I think that was the case. It was the more the guys tried, the more it just didn't go well for them. And in fairness to Cork, look, we've sat here on this podcast and questioned their intensity. We've questioned their tackling. We've questioned their willingness to get involved in difficult ball on the ground in the air, and they did all that yesterday. There was a score yesterday that Declan Dalton finished. It put Cork. It was them. To go from 317 to 318 is where they turned over Darren Morrissey, and it was a lovely score. They just hassled him. He thought he was away, turned him over, flicked to Dalton over the bar. And that, for a defence, is kind of soul destroying, to be honest. When you get turned over coming out, it's very difficult. But look, the sending off had a big part to play in it, but it definitely wasn't the meaning of the result. And you were talked about the start there, Will, about Clare and Limerick. This wasn't a 5-point loss, to be honest. This was a 10-point loss. If truth be told, it was 9-10-point loss, and Cork were, for what they produced in minute 35 to minute 75, they were full merit for their victory.
Paul, that's 2 good second half performances in a row from Cork, and a few people said in the comments last week that we were being far too sweet on both Cork and Dublin, and we can address Dublin's performance maybe a little bit later on, but I don't know. I mean, it's with the evidence that we have in front of us, and we will always preface everything by saying, I know it's early in the league, but for me, this is 2 good displays from Cork back to back.
It is, yeah, and like, you know, 2 really good challenges there. You know, you're playing Limerick in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, and then you're going up to Galway to play them up in their back garden, and it's not simple, you know. And just goes back to what we spoke about last week, and they just compounded it, as in their tackling when they didn't have the ball, they were just going hounded. You could see the numbers, and it was something I was looking for around the pitch, not just, let's say, for the man in possession, but the numbers of Cork players getting back, and that to me shows an eagerness and it shows an aggression there. And look, they just weren't willing. They seemed to enjoy it. It wasn't a burden for them. They were just getting back, were tackling, and then they were very decisive as well going forward. And something we'll talk about Kilkenny being indecisive as well in Nowlan Park, but Cork were just decisive. They knew what they were going at, and like we said, when Galway get a man sent off straight away, usually sometimes we often see the team that has the extra man drops their work rate. We often see it. Cork upped it, if anything. They said, we're going to put our foot on the gas here now and push on. Lehan's goal then, and it's just, I was just looking at going, yeah, this is the Cork that we associate, full of confidence, up in your face. When you're down, they'll put you down even further again. And we're not getting ahead of ourselves. It's 2 games in. Last week we were tempering everything we said. We're not getting ahead of ourselves. But there was indications there of the things that we would have been critical of Cork before, where they seem to have improved. And they're, like we said, they're tackling hard. They're working really hard as a group. Granted, they still want to do the nice things of popping the ball around the place. But, when the goal is on, they're going at goal and they're creating space for Lehan to run in behind, and they're a very aggressive team at the moment. So look, yeah, we're only two games in, not getting ahead of ourselves, but what Cork are showing us is really good.
A lot to be said, Paul, for drive within individuals when they're coming in this time of year too. Declan Dalton was left out of the panel last season, and then he got back in and got a chance to impress in the Munster Hurling League before the league came round. I thought he was an effective weapon against Limerick last week. Scored 8 points in the game against Galway the weekend just gone by. This is a guy who's come in with a point to prove, and if you're going to lose Cahill and Horgan to injuries ahead of the game, you want someone like Dalton to be able to step up and make an impression.
Yeah, and you're right. He has been around the panel for a few years now as well, and we've seen him. We've seen him what he's capable of in previous games, but maybe the consistency wasn't there. But he gave a good interview as well after the game, and he seemed to be really confident in where he's at the moment. He seemed to be, confident where the Cork team are at as well, and spoke really well, to be honest. But it gave good insight to see where he was. He was just talking very straight that, they know they have work to do. They know, this time of the year, there's lads out to try and grab jerseys, and that they're really enjoying it. And there seems to be good buzz around the place. Maybe the changeover in management, just, there's always that bit of freshness as well, and it's an opportunity for other players to maybe grab a jersey. But he spoke well after the game, and he kind of, gave a bit of insight into, he's maybe grown over the last few years of especially being left off the panel and things, and now he has an opportunity, and he's definitely a player that's taken it. So it's great for Cork to have the likes of those lads coming through and putting pressure on probably lads who have established themselves in the team over the last few years. But, if this lad keeps up his form, Cork will have a small bit of a headache when it comes to championship in terms of who are their starting 6, which is, it's exactly what Pat Ryan wants.
Skell, what have we learned about Galway so far? I mean, Wexford, I think it was fair to say, were pretty poor on the first round of the league. But Galway had a good run through the Walsh Cup. I've been trying lads out. I believe most of the St. Thomas guys are going to be back probably after the break, and maybe they come in and reinforce things for the Limerick game. And even David Burke was talking about the fact he did an interview with the Backdoor GA podcast last week. He was saying he's maybe 2 or 3 weeks away, so he's coming close to coming back in. What have you learned about this Galway team? I know what all the changes they've had to make over the first 2 weeks then.
Yeah, so a couple of points. Well, I think Galway have a good squad, to be honest. I think they have a lot. They're from 1 to 30. I do think they have the bones of a good squad. I also think they've trained hard, in the last week since the Wexford game. I'd say they're using the league as kind of a semi-platform, A, to get games into people, and 2, to put in a good training block. The only thing that would concern me is, I suppose, coming out of yesterday, would be we conceded 4-24, and I can't off memory remember when we conceded that much. Now, I understand there was a guy sent off, I get that, but I'm still looking at the squad and I'm thinking, geez, we had 5 of those backs that played yesterday, we're playing against Limerick, 4 of them in the backs and one big forward. So, it's not as if we have 10 guys to come back into the team, whereby we're going to completely, the complexion of the team is going to be way different. It just looked like the guys were tired and a bit lethargic yesterday, so I'm not overly concerned. The concession rate is one issue that I would have that's far too much, and I think that'll be fixed in days going forward. Learning, I wouldn't quite call it learning, but very concerning is Cahill Mannion's injury. If Galway are going to go places, we need Cahill Mannion at his at 100%, 110%, and he was just coming back from a hamstring injury, and it looks like it's been, re-damaged again yesterday. So that's concerning, because if we're going to challenge Limerick, we need everybody, and it's just if I would equate that now hand in heart, if Galway lose Cahill Mannion, I would equate it to, Kilkenny losing TJ. I know I'm not saying they're the same player, but I'm saying their input and their effectiveness to the team. That's how important they are. So I'm hoping that he comes right, because, like you mentioned a few minutes ago, the round of games comes so fast between league and championship that recovery time just isn't there like it has been in future. And here I am now. I was a big champion of the compressed season because it was fair to everyone. And here I'm looking at Cahill Manning going, shit, we need him back ASAP, and he's potentially out for 6 to 8 weeks. In 8 weeks from now, you don't feel the May come along very fast. So I didn't learn an awful lot, to be honest. I'm not concerned. If you ask me this in a month's time, when we're near the end of the league, and we put in that performance, I'd be far more concerned. Because there's still time to fix everything.
Get Paul's evaluation in Galway in a second, but just 9180 was in contact on the Instagram stories earlier today, and he was asking, should Declan Dalton have been sent off, Skehill? So you're the Galway rep here, so you can give a very fair opinion on this. Yeah,
first of all, right, when I have to say, I don't like soft shite on a hurling pitch, you know what I mean? So I hate to see lads going down, holding their face or whatever when they haven't been touched or feign injury trying to buy something, right?
Was the contact with the face though?
Will see you if you were to look. I don't think it was, to be honest, right? I think it was kind of the top of the shoulder and maybe clipped the bottom of the face guard. I think that if you were to ask me truthfully, 95% of the force was probably the shoulder, and maybe 5% was maybe an after that. So I don't think it was sending off at all. I think, in fairness, it was it was a bit aggressive. We all do it from time to time, but did it warrant a red card? Absolutely not. I say Cahill just got it in maybe the shoulder next section. So it wasn't, if you were to look at something similar, you'd say Bennett's red card against Dublin last week. Bennett clearly caught, I can't remember the Dublin player, in the face last week, right in front of the linesman. So I think he deserved what he got. Whereas in this instance, Declan deserved what he got also, in just the yellow.
All right. Galway impression for you then, Murph, so far. What have you made after 2 games?
Yeah, look, I mean, Galway are in a good place still at the moment. They're learning, they're improving, and we're always looking for teams that are showing sparks of, what could they do this year? But not every team are going to show that yet. They had a good performance last week, and last week we were sitting here talking about, there was no problems with Galway. It was Wexford, but maybe it's just at this stage Cork are really ticking well that they exposed Galway for a few weaknesses they have at the moment and just got around them. Galway will also be looking to see, look, if we do go down a man, what do we do and react there? And that's something important for a team to have as well, because if you have no response for when you go down by a player as to how we're going to set up, and teams are just going to, the inevitable is just going to happen and the other team is just going to ramp home, it's not a great place to be. But I wouldn't have huge concerns at the moment for Galway. I think they'd like to get a few more of the experienced players back again, just to, I suppose, give that bit of stability to the main team. But I think Galway do have a strong panel at the moment. It's just a matter of getting all the players onto the pitch. They don't think they obviously don't know their best 15 yet, but I wouldn't have much concerns for Galway. Again, this is one game where Cork are really well, and Cork are taking over really well at the moment. So look, they can be disappointed in good few parts of the game from the weekend. And like James had said, they conceded quite a bit, but they performed really well last week as well. So at the moment, the jury's very much out on Galway, and I wouldn't be concerned at any stage because, teams could just have, off weekends in the league at the moment. So I wouldn't be concerned from a Galway point of view.
Mm-hmm. And Skehill, one last one on Galway. How important is this game against Limerick, which is coming up now? Because I kind of got the feeling last year, going down to Limerick's own turf, turning them over, even though it was second round of the league, I think, last year when they met, it still felt like a really important result for Galway. Is it as important to beat them this year again?
I don't think so, Will. I think Galway have played Limerick enough times now since 2017 even, between league and championship, that we know what Limerick are going to produce. I think it's more about, finding yourself. We came up short against Limerick last year, came up short against Limerick in 2020 and also in 2018 obviously. So it's we have to find something. So that comes from using players in intense situations. So I'd like to see, if we put out our strongest 15 against Limerick, I'd be disappointed, to be honest. I want to see a strong 10 or 11 and then put in 4 guys who you think can potentially you could use in a championship game. So you could, I'd like to see the Gavin Lees go in, the Liam Collins is again Oisin Salmons again. Let's see what they're made of. Can they when they face Limerick, the top players, the Heckards, the Lynch, etc. What can they produce? And again, a bit like I said about Clare, if we do go that route and we use, let's say, a 2/3 starters and 1/3 non-starters against Limerick, and we get beaten, it'll be the manner in which we get beaten, if we do get beaten, that I'd be looking for. I want to see a performance first and foremost for guys who can add to championship, because that's all I'm looking towards.
Paul, comment coming in from Caveman Dan 99, which is a great name.
Good name.
Standard of league hurling, which is a very wide point which has been made here, right? Now, there was a few games of the weekend which I thought were a little bit of a disappointment because I was hoping they were going to be more competitive. So that's one thing. On the other hand, there was loads of really good individual skill at the weekend. There was the Hegarty ball that he slapped into the ground in like a huge bunch of players, and somehow he manages to emerge with the ball, which would have been fantastic skill if that had happened in Croke Park in the middle of the summer. There was the picky flick from Laois's Picky Mar as well. I don't know if you saw this one, where he realised he couldn't catch it again. Next thing he went whoop, and he flicked the ball over, caught it, and then crucially put it back over the bar after he caught it in his hurl. Like, there was a few kind of lovely moments like that. You are probably getting to the point where things aren't quite kicking in for teams so far, but I didn't have any great issue with the standard of the games we saw last weekend, aside from, say, some of the margins we might have seen.
Yeah, last week I was expecting the standard to be a lot poorer than what it was. I was actually surprised to see where teams were at. I think actually what contributed to that last week was the quality of the pitches. You know, often, I suppose when myself and Skehill would have played league matches years ago, invariably the pitches were quite heavy and teams got dragged into these, battles where the ball wouldn't come out of a ruck for 10 minutes.
We were heavy too, though, Murph.
We were heavy.
We were heavy as well.
There's no such thing as players wintering anymore, which is a bad thing. Yeah. But no, I think what you can look at that, the standard league hurling, I actually think it's really good. Like, if you even look at Dublin and Antrim at the weekend, and particularly Antrim as well, to give them credit, they're moving the ball really well and they're really sharp, but you can expect that teams are going to send passes astray, lads are going to miss touches. But I think the overall standard is actually really good. I think the other thing you're going to see as well is those games, like you said, where you build yourself up to go, this is going to be a great game. Kilkenny Tipperary, probably the epitome of that at the weekend, and suddenly you walk away with a big question mark over going, what was that? That was terrible. That's not what we expected. But that's just the nature of it. It's the nature of league hurling. Some teams, or some weeks, teams will just come and it's flat, and you don't know why it's flat. But there's such heavy training going on that it maybe just doesn't happen for teams on certain weekends. But then there's other games where the skill is absolutely excellent. But I think where it is at the moment, the quality of skill in the league, I think it's far beyond where it used to be. Like, if you look at most games now, for example, and it's a very small point, and it's not a point to judge all league games on, but this skill, the John Troy skill that you would have called before, popping the ball back into the hand, that's nearly happening in every match you watch now on both sides. And the likes of Picky Mar scored a great point at the weekend where, again, I don't know, is that the same one you were saying, Will, where he went and he dummied it and came back on himself? And maybe it's a different one.
No, it's the same one. It was an unbelievable piece of skill. It was actually great. I saw someone, one of the local photographers, Paul Dargan, who I'm going to give credit to on this one. He actually was perfectly positioned, right? So he got a snapshot of it, he basically had his camera on a continual shutter, and he was able to make a gif of it, where he was able to just kind of get frame by frame, Piggy flicking the ball over and then just catching it perfectly on the other side. So it was a magic piece of skill.
Yeah, magic. And I my claim to fame is Picky Mar put in the kitchen that you see me on here now. So he's a good craftsman on the pitch and in the kitchen. So, but no, there is. I think the standard. Look, I think
he's dear though. He's dear.
Jeez, he's pricey. Yeah. Hard to get him called on a Monday as well. I'll apologise.
Handling Kitchen's getting a free shout out in the pod, but there you go.
But tell me, Murph, what do people want from the league? It's like I look at Twitter and they're all giving out about the league. It's like they want a championship style match in February.
Yeah, I think this is it. People want, we have the league back, or Limerick are going to be playing more for the weekend and they want fireworks. But you know yourself, you just don't get that. I think managing expectations is the big thing with the league. And you can say that for hurling or football or camogie or anything. It's just, teams are not peaking. And if your team is peaking at the moment, I'd nearly be concerned. If you want your team to be probably firing at about 80%, and you can see the margins where they need to improve in. That's what the desirable place for your team at the moment. But I think some people just need to manage the expectations of thinking that each team, every weekend we go about, no matter where you look, you're going to see an excellent game. But teams are just going to have off games. Games will get dragged into kind of just dirty battles, really, and small margins win the game. But unfortunately, if you commit to a game at the weekend and you're disappointed with the performance, that's just the nature of the league. And I'd like to think it may never change, because it's the championship is where you want teams peaking and really going well. Yeah. And the more teams peaking for championship, well, that's what we want.
Yeah. Even Skehill, when things were different, like when there was the gap between the league and championship, and I appreciate it feels a little bit different now because it's a league into a league and all that. But would there ever been a year with Galway where you were almost concerned that it felt like you were going too well early on in the
No, to be honest with you, it would always be the other way. It was like, she's not going well enough, because so like that. Like I think in nowadays you only ever get kind of parity of effort in May, June, July when the same teams are putting the same kind of training loads and they're not killing themselves each week. Whereas now there's like Galway could have trained 4 times last week and Cork could have trained twice. We don't know. We don't know at all. But in years previous, where I will say the league was more competitive because there was a relegation. I think it's a huge safety net, and if you were to ask me, does it need to be looked at? I think it does, in the sense that when the top teams, let's call the top 8, know that they're in truth not going to get relegated. That allows, I suppose, a freedom for the managers to pick and choose teams and utilise certain players that mightn't have got a chance when there was relegation because it was dog eat dog. Whereas so when I was playing, it was always that more fun. We were always kind of, I won't say concerned relegation. You wanted to finish top and get out of that zone, that area where potentially you could be relegated. So that means you had to, really go a bit harder than what you'd have liked, if you know what I mean. Whereas nowadays they can structure the championship accordingly.
Murph, did you find that over the years as well, that it was always a case of, right, we got to try and taper the year in? Was there ever a time you thought, geez, maybe we're going a bit too hard at this early in the year, or how did the league sit with you?
I don't think us as players ever really overthought it. We would have been kind of in the position, certainly when I joined, like my first year playing the league, let's say being on the panel was 2011. And for me, I was one of the players trying to get my name on a team sheet for a championship, whereas other players were in a different position. But if you go as far as the All-Ireland, for example, and your season is that bit longer, and as a result, you're getting back that bit later than other teams to your pre-season. When it comes to the league, you're still blowing the cobwebs off to a certain degree, and you understand that you're a team that's the legs are that little bit heavier when you're on the pitch, and the other teams are going to be going well. And I remember I used to take a little bit of solace. Like, you never wanted to lose a game, but when you were beaten by such a team, maybe in Nowlan Park, or you went somewhere and you just lost by a point, and the opposition fans were celebrating, and you were coming away going, lads, we're only back training 4 weeks. Those lads that we've heard have been training since the end of October, or whatever it is, you're always going, we'll get them when it comes back. This was the attitude. So for like Limerick lads, for example, they'll be going, we don't have as much work done as other counties, yet Cork, who are going really well at the moment, just bet us the other night, and they'll be fine with that, but they'll be going, we don't want that to happen again. So other teams as well, you just have to kind of take stock of what you've done. But we always wanted to go out and win the league. We wanted to win all our matches and so on, because I think any player who turns up on a given day, you want to win. Like, you can't tell a player not to win. You want to win. But at the same time, if you didn't win the league, you weren't going away from it distraught the year over. You were actually going, right, now we're focusing on championship and on we go. So by nature of just being a player, you were always competitive when you went out and you wanted to win. And if that meant, you were good enough and you went to win the league, well, happy days. But you were never going to, I suppose, be too hard on yourself if it didn't work out, and you could put your finger on why it didn't work out.
You were saying that you almost walk away from Kilkenny and Tipperary the weekend and go, what the hell was that? Was that your feeling at half time when Tipper 2-13 to 7 points up on away soil against Kilkenny?
Yeah, well, I could see where it was coming from. It wasn't that it was going, what's happening. From a mental point of view, I just think Kilkenny weren't at the races at all, but they were just indecisive. Like, that was the one thing that was coming through for me when I was watching it. It was just going, they're not making the right decisions here, or they're forcing the issue. They're going that one pass too much. Whereas you see when Tipperary were getting chances, they were clinical. Now they were hitting wides, and they were hitting even a few more wides than Kilkenny, but they were creating more chances at the same time. But I could see in areas where Kilkenny, it just looked a bit disjointed all over the pitch. And I could make sense of it. I could see where it was kind of happening. Not to say, you knew all the answers, but part of it was mentally were Kilkenny up for the game. And another part of it was their play was just so disjointed from a tactic point of view. They were just a little bit making the wrong decisions here and there, not going towards the ball. Half back line were a bit flat. So when Tipperary broke the line, they were just true on the full back line. There was just a few things there. And another one was when Kilkenny players would get the ball, some lads were taking on, like Park Welch got a great point in the second half, took on Shane McCallum and popped it over. But there was times where Kilkenny were, if they couldn't get through the tackle, were turning around and popping it back. That's good to get you out of trouble at times, but if you play that ball more than you should, it gets very negative. And Kilkenny were playing a bit flat that way. So I could see where it was going wrong for them. But I'd say what Derek Ling and the lads will be looking at will be, why did the lads turn up like this? Because we were quite sharp up in Cork Park, granted against a sterner test against Tipperary, but again, it goes back to just being inexcusable. Tipperary have come down here. Tipperary were clinical. We were in the All-Ireland final last year. We're supposed to be a better team. There's players putting their hand up for jerseys. There's lots of things there you could point to say this should not be the performance we got.
Yeah, and I think particularly inexcusable when it's your rivals coming to your home ground and you don't expect yourself to find yourselves 12 points down at half-time here.
No, you don't. And that was always a point of pride with us. I remember, I think it was 2014, we played Tipperary in the park, and I think that was the one that was an enormous score. Colin Fenley got 2-4 or something like this, or it was a crazy score. But I think that day we were down at one stage by about 10 or 11 or 12 points against Tipperary in the park, and we ended up winning by 6. It was just a kind of a thing that, okay, it might be the league and teams might be doing whatever, but this is Tipperary in Nowlan Park. You put up, you're the team that has to perform, not Tipperary. You're the team that has to perform, and similar to Tipperary and Thurles. And over the years, touching back on what we were saying about how serious did we take it, you can say whatever about how serious we took it. We took everything serious. But when Tipperary were coming to Nowlan Park, it was a different story. You call it off. Don't care if you're back training 2 weeks or you're back training 10 weeks. You put in a performance and you don't give an inch. And you can say over the weekend the inch was given to Tipperary over the weekend.
Yeah, and James, look, Tipperary took their chances here. Jason Ford 115, which is a serious individual haul. When they've eased him back into action, they kind of went a different direction for the Laois game and then brought him in for this game with a man the match performance, Jake Morris, who we know all about in the last few years, scored a goal and 2 points, and then they spread it across the rest of their team. It was 11 scores in all that Tipperary had. So I think if you're Liam Cahill and his Tipperary management team, you're probably thinking at the moment, James, they're easing a few players in. Like there was a league debut there for Alan Tynan, who used to play dual minor and was with Munster Rugby and played underage for Ireland. Yeah. He played his first game at the weekend and looked lively. So there's kind of 3 or 4 players that they've got in and got a bit of experience. And at the same time, he's working these key positions out and still getting a bit out of the veteran players. It looks to me, I mean, we spoke quite glowingly about Tipperary last week. It looks to me like Cal has a few of his ideas working out pretty well already.
Yeah, like we said last week, or I particularly said last week, I just didn't know where I stood with Tipperary because he didn't know what they were going to come with. And I'd say if Liam Cahill was being honest, given an appraisal yesterday, I don't think he expected his team probably to produce a performance at the level they did. And I think that probably is coupled with the fact that Kilkenny were a bit lethargic, to be honest. But, Tipperary, it's easy point to the scores, the lovely point taken when you're in space, but like they were vicious tackling, I thought. And what Murphy said there about passes going back the way, that's a great sign of opposition forcing you back the way. So like if you have to constantly turn back and look for an out ball for a guy behind you, that means there's no way forward, or the guys up at the far end are getting marked like fierce well, so there's no space. So I think Tipperary from a satisfaction perspective, it's great to go down to Nowlan Park obviously and win. It's great to produce the type of scores they did and get performances from guys did, but just overall the level of commitment, the work that they put down on the day, and the way they tackled and hassled and just really put it up to Kilkenny, would be very impressive. And their body language as well. Whenever they won, they called it the minor battles, the minor wars. Let's say where you win a free or you win a jostle. There was 3 or 4 times Tipp lads ran through and physically knocked over Kilkenny lads. That little things will spur you on an extra 0.5% or 1%. So you're looking for these marginal victories. So when you see someone run through and he bowls over a Kilkenny fella, that's like a platform for success. So Tipp just won. They won every kind of measurable battle yesterday, to be honest. And in fairness to, I know we're talking about Tipp, but Kilkenny, they fought back fierce well, and only for a couple of, which I'll touch on in a second, the shot selection, the way that the teams over the weekend were shooting for goals, like it's just criminal the way they're shooting such high. And I think of Walter Walsh, and I think it was John Donnelly. John Donnelly, John Donnelly shoots just above Hogan's right shoulder, like look at the way Mossy Keown finished his goal. That's the way every forward should finish a goal. Lower to the ground on the keeper's opposite side. But John Donnelly and Walsh both shot high, which gives a great opportunity for a keeper to save it. So like if you look at Kilkenny and they convert one of those chances, the complexion of the game might be different. I know it's easy, it's ifs and buts, you know what I mean? But it's just Kilkenny weren't killed by any measure of means, but they got back within 4 points or 5 points at one stage. And you're hoping they'll shove on again, but just Tipperary showed enough class, and even the guys they brought on the bench, were seriously effective. So they've a good squad and they're building nicely.
Yeah, well, take us down goalkeeper masterclass here, Skehill. Like, I was thinking of you because you would put in the WhatsApp group about some of those Kilkenny shots in the second half when, the goal chances presented themselves and they've been hit at good angles for a goalkeeper. I think anything that's kind of high and up around here and not down low gives a goalkeeper a good chance. And I thought the Antrim goals that were taken in the next match, which was on the TV, Keelan Malloy particularly, and I think there was a couple of other shots that went in really low and they were incredibly hard to save.
Yeah.
Kilkenny made it maybe a bit easy for the goalkeeper by shooting in the area that they were shooting in.
They did. So if you can picture, okay, now I'm going to get technical now, boys, so buckle up, right? So if you can picture a keeper, right? If a keeper has the ability to be able to fall back and save at the same time, you're making it easy for him. So if you picture, let me give you a good one. Owen Murphy save against Wexford last year. Do you remember that, Nowlan Park?
Yeah.
Owen was able to fall back and still save, right? If that ball is put on the ground or put left or right of him, whereby he has to go laterally, where he has to move himself, right, he doesn't save it. So all the shots over the weekend where you saw Donnelly, Walsh, Neil McManus did it, Shane Barrett did it versus Galway, where they're hitting this height, or like where a keeper has the ability to fall back and still save, it's going to be saved. Like, granted, some of them go in, don't get me wrong, Lehan's one went in, it was a great goal, but you're giving the keeper too much of a chance. If you put that ball low like Mossy Keown, that's not getting saved. And then probably the best finish of the weekend was Jason Ford's, where he's coming in. If you the picture, it was the first goal, wasn't it? So he's coming in, right? He's a left-sided shooter.
Yeah. And
so every goalie, like 99 of 100 goalies will think he's going to go across somebody, but he put it to the near post. Super finish. And no goalie can anticipate that, because you can take a chance, maybe a 5% chance that you think you're going to read him. And that's why you often see goalies diving the same direction as players when they go across the body. But Ford finished that one excellently. And same with Jake Morris when he got his goal. You see the keeper, the Stoney goalie, what's his name?
Aidan Tallis.
Tallis, yeah, who played very well, to be honest, right? As Jake Morris is shooting, he's shooting Tallis is falling in a direction that Jake Morris is going across his body, but Jake Morris slices the far side. So very, very smart finish. So it's just, I was saying about, if you give to summarise, if you give the goalie a chance to be able to fall backwards and put up the hurl at the same time, you're bet. Whereas if you make him go laterally left to right, you're increasing the chances dramatically.
Yeah, it reminded me kind of the Desi Hutchinson goal, which I thought was an incredible finish. Now, as it turned out, Enda Rowland, the Laois goalkeeper, got turned over, so it was actually a couple of Laois defenders who gone back to try and cover the line. But I was just thinking, Hutchinson gave them no chance whatsoever, because he hit a daisy cutter that went low right across goal. It didn't matter how many lads got back in the line, that was going in.
Low across the body, yeah, very difficult. Like, can you imagine now if he hit a bullet straight at, was it Paddy Purcell on the goal?
Paddy Purcell, yeah.
Paddy
If
Purcell
he hits a bullet straight at Paddy Purcell has two chances. One, it hits him, or two, he can fall back and get the hurl up. So by putting it across his body, and I know you boys think it's handy, why didn't he save that? Yeah, but no, see, it's not that fucking simple, is it? when the ball goes across person, like.
So what was the handy save you made up last year during the club match? It was on Twitter last year. Remember that handy one?
Yeah, a lad of the club said I should have caught it. Lad of the club said, why are you diving around the place? You should have caught it, he said.
Shoulder height. You just put an extra bit of spice on it there by hitting the deck afterwards. That's all that happened there.
He knew the game was been streamed, so he made sure he was getting clipped.
Yeah, I did, yeah, and we're getting bait.
Daniel, if your club mate's entirely right. If you caught that, brought it down, poked it out, nice bit of distribution, no one would have seen the clip.
Yeah, just 4 broken fingers, that's all.
Yeah. Murph, I've got to give you young Garrod's comment here. Garrod Og has asked, is Cahill setting Tipp up to burn out like the Dacia last year? See, I'm not sure about this. I read this slightly differently. I think Liam Cahill has shown that he can go into setups and get a kick out of a team. Like this happened. Like Waterford were in a low enough ebb when he took over. Got them to an All-Ireland final. It didn't quite happen for them last year. But I'm not sure if that was a pattern about Liam Cahill that say what happened to Waterford last summer. And with Tipperary, he knows these guys incredibly well, particularly this new group of players that are coming in. He'll know them inside out from being within the county, having managed some of them before with minor and with under 20. I read this more that Cahill's actually getting a kick out of Tipperary that maybe wasn't there last year.
Yeah, it seems to be. Something that always strikes me about Cahill is that he seems to be just a man with a plan. Like, he knows what he wants to do. And even like Michael Breen being full back, when I saw that at the start of the year, I was kind of thinking, I wasn't actually, like, I was surprised to see it. But because it was Liam Cahill, I was just going, he sees this differently. You know, there's something going on here. And I think the players as well, when a manager has that, I suppose, presence about him, that he knows what he wants to do, and this is what we're doing, and you come with me on it. Players buy into that, because players just want to be told what to do. They're like sponges. Tell us what to do and we'll do it for you. And he has a great understanding of the panel he has as well. I mean, using like Shane McCallan at the weekend, he used him, I thought, really well. In that Shane, he was coming out looking for the ball. If you look at the goal for Jason Ford's goal, when he came out, Shane McCallan took it down, knew where Ford was. Ford, you could see he was waiting for it. He knew Shane McCallan was clever enough to know that he was there. Shane McCallan had the presence of mind just to turn and pop it into him. But he seemed to be the fella that was creating stuff for the lads around him, for the Tipp lads. So he got the balance really well there with, the few younger lads coming in, the few experienced fellas. So I don't think they're going to burn out at all. No, really yesterday, I just think they hurled really well and they were very sharp. And I would actually say they're probably just in a really good place. They don't strike me as a team, like they're not going to go out and obliterate teams every week. And if they're obliterating teams, well, then they're miles ahead and then they could burn out. But I just think that he has them taken over really well. They're probably just a little bit reinvigorated again with new management. We said it earlier. Just when new management comes in, it's a new voice and, players see a new opportunity again. But his style is, there's nothing fancy about it. He knows how to unlock defences. He knows how to set up a team really well. And the players he has at Tipperary, he's a good panel there at Tipperary. He's good panel of hurlers. And like we said, a panel that he has worked with at underage. So I think there's lots of things here in Tipperary's favour, but I don't think they're set to burn out. As much as I'd like to say that as a Kilkenny man, I don't think they're set to burn out because I just think they hurled really well at the weekend. A little bit of that was tempered by the fact that Kilkenny were quite flat in the first half. But I wouldn't be concerned as a Tipperary players or Tipperary supporter thinking that these lads are miles ahead of everyone else at the moment. They're not. They just seem to be playing really well, enjoying what they're doing. And I wouldn't be concerned. I don't think there's anything similar to the Waterford burnout here.
Skehill, they might have to think about just how the rest of this spring kind of pans out from here, though, because they will be expected to get one, if not two wins, given that they've got Dublin and Antrim still to come in the league. They've got Waterford to play as well, but you would expect that they will probably win two of those three, which will definitely put them into a league semi-final, given they already have 2 wins on the board right now. Then they have to navigate the Munster Championship a couple of weeks after the league final. So maybe Cahill has to think about this a little bit, though, about how he works his players into it over the next 4 or 5 weeks. Yeah,
I don't think this will come as a surprise him because obviously he went through this process last year. He went gung-ho for the league. They won it with Waterford, and we see what happened in the championship. So I'd say he's got one eye on it and how he's going to structure himself. And I think the way the league is structured for Tipperary in particular, he has that allowance whereby he can tailor the team selections and to the level of difficulty that the opposition are going to provide. Tipper in a good spot because it seems like they can dictate what teams they go to field and dictate what way they move into the Munster Championship. So I think from what he's learned last year, in particular at Waterford, that'll be brought into to his mind space this year, and he'll be quite conscious of it. And because certainly what he doesn't want to happen is get a good bit of steam up, get a good league campaign for Tipperary, and then suddenly for the wheels to come off. I'm not saying they would, but I'm just saying he was in charge of the team where it happened last year, so he'd be quite conscious of it. I just think Tipperary, for the squad they have, and the quality they have, and the history they have also, which you'll hear me repeating every week, that accounts for an awful lot. And I don't see an issue whereby come, just back to that question, come championship time, the Tipper on the actual descendancy. I think they'll be peaking just right, having had a good league campaign. I think if he gets a semi-final, if he wins it, he wins it. If he doesn't, I don't think he's too bothered, to be honest. I think he knows himself it's all about championship, and then we'll see what the true Tipper like then.
Niall6591, which I'm assuming you sent him a birthday card on the 6th of May for his 22nd birthday, I'm guessing, based on his name that he's got on Instagram here. Kilkenny's puck-out strategy yesterday, clueless, ? Paul Murphy, clueless puck-out strategy.
That's heavy.
Yeah. That's heavy. I'm just asking you what the man has said. It's not me.
Yeah, look, I think he's picking out one part of the game. Like it was symptomatic, really, of a loss of the game. I don't think he could put it back on Talis either in the goal. It was the options really not being provided for him out the field. Lots of times you could see a short puck out happening, and I've said the word flat already. It was just a case of a player taking it flat-footed, turning, looking what's on, nothing really on, running up a bit of a cul-de-sac, and then just striking it. So potentially, puck out strategy, not great. But what I would more say is it goes back to what we were saying earlier. It was just the options on the pitch of players moving, creating that space, just being enthusiastic about going looking for a puck out and giving the options for the keeper. I wouldn't look back at Dane Tallis here and say that there was anything that he was doing. It was just the options. Now they did cough up a few kind of, I suppose, mistakes there. I mean, there was one important time there. Kilkenny brought it back to about 5 points, and I think Tallis did actually puck a ball out and went to one of the Tipperary lads. Now, I didn't actually see what happened because TG Carr hadn't come back from the after the fact. But yeah, I wouldn't be too hard on the keeper in this instance. It was really more symptomatic of the outfield players, maybe not moving, not supporting then when the short puck out came, and then even in the forwards, just moving across and looking for a long puck out. So I wouldn't be too hard on them in this instance.
All right, let's stick with Division 1B then. We had Waterford coming out winners in the end against Laois, 231 to 219. Perhaps doesn't tell the full story of the match. Waterford hurled for over an hour a man short because Michael Kiley was sent off for an off-the-ball incident very early in the game. Their subs made a big difference though, and going into that 49th minute of the game, we already spoke about the Desi Hutchinson goal which put Waterford back in front, but Laois were 2 points up at that stage in the game, and then they emptied the bench a little bit. 11 points coming from their subs, 6 of those coming from Ozzie Gleeson, so that's 2 good performances off the bench for him. They eventually got through in this one, Skehill, but you know, Laois gave them a good rattle up until about 20 minutes to go. I'm wondering, is that maybe going to be a familiar story for the season though, when we talk about Laois, Antrim and Westmeath here?
Yeah, I think, let's say, I was just going through, like, I have a tendency to take notes through all games. I'm looking at them here as I'm talking to you. The first one I've written was Waterford weren't physical in the first 35 minutes, and Laois were ultra physical. Like, their tackling was fantastic. They had a whole host of numbers around what seemed to be every single ball that a Waterford man touched. But again, Waterford allowed Laois to grow into the game, because at times they sat Callum Lyons very deep, nearly like a sweeper per se, even with a man down. And Laois just throve on that. Like, 95% of Laois's scores, bar the goal obviously in the first half, were coming from distance. And they were great wonder scores, great accuracy, don't get me wrong. But when the ball actually went into the full forward line, and 50-50 chance to say, Waterford were coming out of it. So obviously Laois weren't getting much change out of the full forward line, so they were shooting long. So I couldn't for the life of me understand why Waterford sat back. They should have just pushed up. And then there's a couple of things happening in the game, obviously. The Corby red card, which was justified in my opinion. And like you said about the introduction of the substitutes, it just coincided with probably a superior level of fitness, to be honest, from Waterford, and that's what they pulled away. But it was a well contested game for 50-55 minutes, but just that bit of quality, and where you had probably the Laois substitutes didn't make the same impact, and then they got tired, and when you get tired your concentration drops, and when your concentration drops your execution goes to shit, to be honest. And that's just what happened in the last 10 minutes. You know, they just didn't produce the same level of execution that they did in the first 50, where the tackling count went way down. So, but look, I'm not trying to be dismissive of Laois. It was a good performance for a period, but they still have more to do.
Yeah, Willie Maher was a lot happier, was his name, after the game with this performance than the one they put in against Tipperary the week before. And the thing is, Murph, maybe they're going to find a few different options here, because Paddy Purcell is now hurling deeper. We mentioned how he found himself back on the line after Rowland got turned over in the lead up to the Hutchinson goal, but he's going to be playing probably as centre half back or a sweeper. That's now liberated Ryan Mullaney, who was their general number 6 and a big unit of a player, to go up and actually cause problems further up the pitch. And he did a lot of hurling in the half forward line at the other end. He gets 2 goals and 2 points, which I wasn't expecting that out of a guy who's generally been the anchor of a defence in pretty much all of his intercounty career.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I don't know, was it his second goal? I was watching it, and the corner forward was looking to pop it off to someone. I was in, there's someone running off the shoulder. Who's he popping it to? And Mullaney pops up. I said, how is this fella after turning up? Which is incredible stamina out and get up there and support. But it's obviously something he's been directed to do as well. You know, you don't make that run from centre back twice because the management haven't told you, listen, you can get up here and support. And like you said, Paddy Purcell then sitting there, like, he's another athletic man. And we saw a few drives out of him from the half back line forward. Really, yeah, just bringing the attack at Waterford. And like, they have great players around the pitch, Laois, and I suppose just setting them up in terms of where's the best launching pad for those players is really what they're trying to figure out. But I think he'll be really happy. I think Willie Maher will be really happy coming away from there going, actually, we're after seeing a few things here. I mean, Mullaney there, I mean, he was the best man to have in your fantasy team over the weekend. If anybody had him, I didn't have him now, but I was kicking myself afterwards. But, you know, exactly what you said there, Will. You know, Paddy Purcell, a man who would have hurled really well for Laois over the last few years, and even when they got to the quarter final, you know, great player. But seems rejuvenated again, kind of playing that deeper role and maybe launching from there. And I was kind of looking at it. Maybe it's a similar thing that Liam Cahill is looking at with Tipperary, that Mickey Breen kind of starting that bit deeper. Not deep as full back, but these lads who have savage athleticism, if you were going to run the ball out of defence, well, these are the boys that you nearly want to pop it to, that they're going to drive up the pitch because they're big men, they're hard to stop, and their game is running the ball. So I think Maher will be happy with a few of the lads who put their hand up over the weekend, and the likes of Picky Maher then jumping in with a few scores as normal. So, no, definitely he'll be happier with this performance compared to the performance the week previous.
All right, Skehill, let's talk about the man behind the wire then, because this has come up now 2 weeks in a row. You've been coached by Davy Fitzgerald, you've been a goalkeeper in his team, so you can give us an inside track into what was going on here, because eventually the Lee Stewarts decided to move the man who was part of the Waterford management team, who was also behind the goal in Dungarvan the week before, and we wondered what instructions he was given out to Billy Nowlan when he was in goal. So obviously he got moved, but then the picture emerges, and I think Sportsfile took this picture. I'm just having a look at it in front of me here now. And it looks like there's a bit of tape around his ear, which could well be concealing some kind of listening device, in the same way that we saw the picture, and I think it was Buff Egan who initially spotted this one with Mark Fanning the year before. It seems that there's very clearly instructions coming from the sideline by way of either the man behind the wire or potentially an actual wire, which is giving out instructions about puckouts to the goalkeeper.
Well, he's not listening to Spotify anyway, that's for sure. This all, I witnessed it firsthand 16 years ago, which is a long time ago now, when I was part of the Fitzgibbon team with Fitzy. He situated a guy on the sideline who would hold either a water bottle, a high-vis vest off memory, or a hurl, something like that, or a sliotar. And each item was signified an area of the pitch. So, for example, if he held the water bottle, that goes to number 10. This is back in time now where we just lumped the ball. There was no sharper gouts, there was no tippy-tappy. And so if he held the vest or the hat or whatever it was, 11, and if he held the ball, whatever it was, it goes to 12. And so me, just being me at that age, every now and then I just run egg, and just hit it, and straight away I'd have a message come down to me, ran down to me, stick to the structure. Because what it did is it provided all the outfield guys knew where the ball was going as well. They take a quick look over where the item was, and at the time I didn't mind it too much because it was working, because we were winning, right? But nowadays when I look at the earpiece, right, I'm thinking, what's Billy Nowlan? He's either getting information or he's getting instruction. Instruction I completely disagree with, because you're taking the onus, you're taking the natural ability, the natural instinct of the goalkeeper to see what's in front of him, to play the game in front of him. Because no matter what you see, if you're on the sideline or behind the goal or you're in the stand and you're wired up to Billy Nowlan, when you see it and get the message to Billy, and Billy, I suppose, understands information, processes it, the opportunity could be gone. Whereas Billy could see it himself, and the opportunity is right there. So I don't agree with this formal instruction. But if he's getting information, I don't have a problem with it. I don't agree with the way he's getting it. If like me personally, if I'm playing with the club, I like information come back to me every 10 minutes. We've won X amount of balls here, this guy's going well, whatever, etc. Little nuggets, and it's just information. And give me the information and let me process it myself, Whereas if someone came down to me, we were joking about it in our club WhatsApp group, if some lad put an earpiece into my ear and told me where to puck the ball, I'd hit the ball straight at him. You know what I mean? Just out of pure viciousness, because I just think it takes the natural instinct, and probably the best element of a player is his natural instinct and his gut feeling to go with what he sees in front of him. And when you strip that back, it's devolution. It's not evolution at all. And I'm very surprised with it. And I'd like to see just gone away with it, because when you look at the way Billy played, 100% himself, no problem.
Take me back then to this guy who was on Davy's management team, who's in the terrace or on the stand, and people are looking across for messages and so on. Would it not get to a point where the half-back line of the college team that you're playing against would notice that their marker is having a quick look across, or that you're looking across at this guy before you hit the ball out?
Well, no, it didn't. No, truthfully speaking, it didn't. You consider in Fitzgibbon times, those days, we had 4 games. And I suppose video analysis wasn't a big thing back then. It wasn't even present. So statistics weren't even present. So, and look, don't get me wrong, we conceded pretty good now as well, So I'd look over every so often and I see it, and I think I could be open to correction, but I actually think it was the Meath manager, Saoirse Bulfin, who spent a lot of time with Fitzy. I think he was the one doing it, him or Bertie Sherlock from Tipperary. But again, they did well concealing it also. So it just became, I suppose, a bit of structure, and it was kind of like, I won't call it a set play now, but at least people knew where the ball was going. Whereas when you've got an earpiece in the goalie's ear, nobody out the field knows where the ball is going. Nobody has a clue, only the goalkeeper, And I reiterate, if it's information, I've no issue. If it's instruction, fuck that.
Right, so whether it's information or it's instruction, was Davy getting the info over to Saoirse Bulfin for what he was to do? Or was Saoirse Bulfin, let's say, I don't know, empowered, let's use that phrase, to be able to say to you, well, actually, I see a pattern, they've moved across, go 10 this time, go 12. Like, who's actually making the calls?
So Saoirse Bulfin at the time, he's a Bruff man and would have played in goals himself. So I think there was a balance whereby he was probably 75% empowered off memory, and maybe every so often Davy would check in. I'd say he'd check in, and if he wanted to change something, he'd pass the message. Like if someone like Owen Cadigan or Earl Tannion with the two wing forwards, two behemoths in the wing forwards. If one was going well than the other, maybe overload that way a bit more. But I'd say ultimately the overall structure would come from Fitzy. But that Saoirse was given the license, if you want to call it that, to call the plays as he saw fit. And again, the type of game back then facilitated that. It wouldn't work in today's world.
Yeah, and did Davy micromanage everything to that detail, or were puckouts a particular interest of his then?
I would say, again, at the time, I think he had to, because I don't think there was people delegated into every position, so there was no such thing as backs coaches, forwards coaches. S&C was just about to come in at the time, so I think he had to have a little nugget of influence on them all, but particularly on how the team wanted to play, he was heavily involved in that. So if that was a set system, or obviously player selection, don't get me wrong, or a pattern of play, or the pace of play, or how we trained, that was all him. And then he'd empowered the people around him to a certain degree to ensure that they molded everything towards his mindset, his way he thought about it. And if you look today with all the information that you can access and all the platforms and people and professionalism, I'd say ultimately he's like a CEO of a business, so like he's managing director. I think he manages everyone during the week, tells the coach how he envisages the session, and then just loses issues at the weekend.
Yeah. Well, with real-time info, there's potential for a lot more information to actually be passed on to the players now at this stage. And look, Paul, my read on it is I'm not going to walk you into any trouble here, and what I will say is...
you walk me in, wouldn't you?
No, Skehill can talk as freely as he wants. There's no problem. He's played under the system. He's telling us what's happened. I'm having to interpret what I've seen here, which is, for me, it's too much of a coincidence that two goalkeepers in a row have had their ears taped. I can't think of any other reason that they're going to have their ears taped up. I don't think it's a case of two goalkeepers in a row wearing jewellery that they have to cover or something like that. So I'm going to make the inference that it seems that the goalkeepers have got some kind of receiving device to be able to get instruction through their ear. Like, does this sit right that you could have a guy behind the goals handing out instructions, you could have information coming through an earpiece? Should this not be restricted purely to a mere forna as opposed to potentially technology being used? How does it sit with you, Paul?
Yeah, I suppose it's just, is it in the spirit of the game really to be doing it? I don't know. Again, it's just an aid. It's a team trying to get one step ahead. I wouldn't like it, to be honest. If I was a goalkeeper, or even if I knew the goalkeeper on my team was being dictated to, I suppose. If you have the likes of, you're dealing with inter-county goalkeepers here. They're supposedly the best person in that county to be the goalkeeper. They're probably the best subject matter expert to actually tell you what a good puck-out is, and their instincts are very important in this. It's like a free taker, as in they're good at what they do. Puck-outs now even are, it's not just a case of puck it as long and as far as you can or as high as you can. Like, they're hitting laser beams at fellas, they're popping balls into spaces, they're doing whatever, and I think their instinct is important in that. Now again, what is an important aspect to figure out here is how many puck-outs are being dictated to this person. But my view on it would be that if I have, let's say, for example, Owen Murphy in the goal, I know several occasions of where Owen Murphy looked down, and it might seem ridiculous to say that from 80 yards, he's able to make eye contact with a player, and the body language, that player knows that he's about to get it. He's able to create space. Like Walter Welsh, there's a great example of Walter Welsh against Limerick in 2019, scored a point. It was the 5th point we scored against Limerick. And I think it was Brendan Cummins was actually commentating on the match. And it was a case of, Owen looked down, he made eye contact with Walter Welsh from that distance. And Walter Welsh, known from training with Owen what he was about to do, Owen hit him straight to him into the hand and over the bar. Brian Cody wouldn't have been able to see that. So how could Davy's perspective on the game, or whoever else is, now maybe the keeper or the goalkeeping coach behind the goal, maybe he's calling it. But I just think there's no better person to actually see what's going on the pitch than the goalkeeper. And taking that person's instincts away from them and telling them, hook it down to number 10. Whereas his instincts are saying, actually, I could nail a pass here to the midfielder, but I can't do it. I think that creates a disjointed effect on the team. And not only does the goalkeeper's instinct go down the drain, but also now the outfield players know that it doesn't really matter what I'm doing here. The call has just been gone to the goalkeeper. That's been decided 15 seconds ago. It doesn't matter if I run here. So there's lots of aspects here that I just think it's definitely not fine-tuned yet, but I also think that it's not in the good spirit of the game for the creativity of players to actually just let them go and hurl and perform and just they have the autonomy to go at it. I don't think the likes of John Kiley would ever put in something like this, but it's Davy's style. That's his style, and that's what Skehill is saying. That he has form to do it, so maybe that's just what he wants to do. And look, we could be sitting here in 6 weeks' time or 10 weeks' time saying, "Gee, it's working out really well." So early days on it yet, but I wouldn't be a big fan of it.
See, Skell, a few years ago, I went to watch an inter-county training session, and Brendan Cummins was in as effectively doing a goalkeeping session for the night, and everything that he was teaching the goalkeepers that night was entirely counter to this idea. So what he did was he basically put the goalkeepers in either end, and then he got players, primarily subs, to run different lines and to run different positions. And the whole idea was that the instruction would then be basically hit that the guys were going to move into a different direction, and the goalkeepers had to actually make the call about where they were going to puck the ball to. And the whole point of the instruction and the drill that they were doing was that the goalkeepers would be able to think on the fly themselves and to see things that were happening, patterns on the pitch, and to make the right pass. That was more important than a goalkeeper being able to just mullock the ball down the pitch a long distance. So it was about picking somebody out and making the right decisions. This to me sounds like if you're telling the goalkeeper that there's pre-planned moves and you're going to go this way, this sounds a little bit more like NFL than it does National Hurling League.
Yeah, I suppose the thing about NFL is the call comes in pre-snap, so every player on that team knows the call and knows the exact routing because they've practiced it to a T. Whereas in hurling, you're not afforded that opportunity because only the goalkeeper is hooked up in this instance. And like what Brendan did that night with that county team, I fully agree with it because you're allowing the goalkeeper to be both, if this makes sense, reactive to the situation and then be proactive to where the ball goes. Whereas if you put complete instruction on top of him, you just take that ability away from him. And goalkeeping is all about instinct. It's all about your gut. Even like you said, Murph, you're reading people's body language. You're looking at the way a guy shapes, and you're kind of giving him a nod, go, and he makes a shot. It's all it is proactive to a degree, right? But goalkeeping is all reactive. Looking what's in front of you, assessing situation in real time, which is milliseconds, to be honest, intercounty level, whereby you're assessing the opposition setup. Let's say if this lad moves left, should I put it right? If I put the ball over a guy, will it get down on time? You're trying to assess all this information in real time, and I just personally wouldn't like a guy in my ear. It's because even the crowd, you block out the crowd. When you're there as a player, again, everyone will tell you it's like the crowd aren't even there. They don't get into you at all. But if there's someone right in your ear who is part of your setup, it just carries more weight, if you know what I mean. So you'd be more in tune to it. And if you take your mind off it for a millisecond, you've lost a whole host of opportunities. And like Christy Conlon would be the same way with us. Well, he would constantly put these, and Christy has this knack of putting these crazy situations in place where you've just work out, nearly like a bloody physics exam before you get the ball out to somebody, But it's all honed at trying to get you, the goalkeeper, you the person, to make a constructive decision in real time for the best of the team. And again, Christy was brilliant at making you feel uncomfortable in real time so that you get more used to the situation and then execute better when you go into a high intense game. So I just think it's all wrong. And Murphy used the word spirit there. Spirit is one thing, of the game, thinking globally, but just Billy, I'm thinking about the goalie. Billy is the person. I just think it's wrong for him, and his own instincts should be utilised more than the fucking earpiece. I'm sorry.
Well,
for the colourful language.
There you go. Allow the comments to come in. That's something James feels very strongly about. Throw us a comment and something we can definitely chat a bit more. Well, I'm interested to see the stats to see how Waterford's bookouts are going to go when we get a sample size that's bigger than a couple of games as well. Elsewhere in Division 1A, Wexford didn't repeat the missed opportunity for them in the Leinster Championship last year when they were held to a draw by Westmeath. They kicked on in the second half. Was working this game yesterday. Wexford won in the end at Cusack Park by 223 to 115. They were just a point up at half time, 11 points to 10, and Lee Chin went off with a hamstring injury. Now, after the game, the Wexford management were keen to stress that it's just a tight hamstring and he should be okay, that actually the break over the next week might help Chin to be back fit. But again, I'm sure it was disappointing for him to be going off. He hit 5 frees in the first half but was a little bit inconsistent with them. Then Ross Banville came on and hit the frees in the second half. He scored a goal as well, finished up at 1-3. Conor MacDonald with a goal and 2 points. For Westmeath, a familiar story, very reliant on Killian Doyle's frees, 9 points. He scored 8 of them from frees. Owen McCabe got their goal early in the second half, but in the end, it was Wexford getting out by 11 points. I think, Murph, they'll see this as important, Wexford, to have got the win after the way they played against Galway the week before. And look, at least from their point of view, a much improved second half performance. But again, frees are a consistent issue, and again we're talking about Lee Chin's fitness again. It's kind of a familiar story even from last week.
It is, yeah. But I suppose, look, Wexford would be happy that they went back up to Cusack Park and put in a good performance, came away with the win. And look, hopefully for Lee Chin and for Wexford, it is that he felt a bit of a tightness. And we often see that in players where, like, Lee Chin is of the age where he's able to put a hand up and say, listen, this isn't feeling great. And more power to him if that is the case. So, but again, like you said, yeah, and I think it is something that we weren't expecting to be rectified in a week or 2 weeks even. It's just this free taking. They're just leaving behind a few cheap scores. In other games, they may go back to rue it. But I think overall, particularly after last week, I think Wexford will just be happy to have 2 points on the board now. Put in a performance in a place where they were very shaky last year, going up there. Maybe took Westmeath for granted a little bit. So I think that they even just looked a bit more clinical. You know, they were going through for scores. They looked fairly decisive as well. And granted, hit a few wides, but I think at this stage they'll just be happy to be moving on now. 2 weeks of a break, hopefully get another bit of good training underneath their belt, and maybe look to improve not just from this performance but from the Galway performance in general. So I think they'll be happy enough with the weekend.
Yeah, Derry can also mention after the game that he was happy that they're running the right lines to create the chances, because Jack O'Connor had a shot that came back off the crossbar. Conor McDonald hit the woodwork at one point, and then the follow-up shot ended up going into the side netting. On a different day, they could have had 3 or 4 goals as opposed to getting 2. But they're up and running with a win now at this stage, Kel. And look, for Westmeath, this was always going to be tricky. They inherited Offaly's fixtures from last season, and with the way that the league is structured right now, there's always going to be one team that comes up from the second flight who's going to be in with Wexford, Galway, Clare, Limerick, which makes it very, very difficult. And Joe Fortune, their manager, said after the game that he's kind of getting sick of people saying, yeah, you know what, we hurled well for 50, 55 minutes, but we just maybe don't have that strength and depth. And in Westmeath's case, Niall Mitchell's out for 8 weeks after getting some knee surgery. Angus Clark and Cormac Boyle, who were 2 of their last captains, are travelling at the moment. Derek McNicholas, who we had in the show last year, the most experienced player in the All-Ireland Championship in hurling, has stepped away after becoming a dad around about Christmas time. Westmeath can ill afford to lose these players if they're going to stay up in the league and if they're going to stay up in the Leinster Championship.
Yeah, like if you talk about the big teams, we're always saying that they're trying to build big squads. You know, they're trying to get 30 players available for championship. And like you see how a team like Westmeath, if they lose 1 or 2, you know how it decimates their whole campaign. Like if you remember last year, Laois got decimated by injury, and they just took hammering after hammering because, with respect, they just don't have the physical numbers that the top tier counties have at the moment. You know, and I think, but if you were to ask the Westmeath players, Laois players, Antrim to a certain degree, like. If I give you the opportunity to go into Division 1 with 5 of the top 6 or 7 teams, will you take it? Of course they will. You know, of course they will. If you ask Neil McManus into Rowland, you know, Niall Mitchell, do you want to play those games week in, week out, with the potential of getting bet, you know, double scores or 8 or 9 points, they'll still take your hand off because they want to be, I suppose, exposed to top level hurling. And I think, for me, my attitude to all this is it's monkey see, monkey do. Will, you know. Like the more you play these top teams, the more you get exposed to it, you come up against them and realize it's a stark realization of what you have to do. And don't get me wrong, resources are an issue for lower level teams. You know, the size, the pick, the amount of clubs, all this comes into play when you're playing the big counties. But the override message is just stick with it and keep at it and stay the course. And if you pick up injuries, so be it. But just keep on trucking, you know, because it's the only way they're going to improve and evolve as a county. Because you look at the traction they got last year in the football by winning the. Is it Tackling Cup? Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
Look at the homecoming they got in. I don't know where they got in Mullingar or something like that.
Oh, Mullingar went absolutely bananas.
Yeah, it was fabulous.
It wasn't quite the case with the Joe McDonough the year before when the hurling went up, but the footballers brought out the crowd.
Yeah, but I'm saying like that. Who knows? Like if you just keep at it, and like, the same message goes to the Kerrys and the Carlows this world, like, you know, who are trying to, I suppose, go up against their own county, for like, where it's a football dominated area. So, yeah, they're going to shift a couple of beatings. That's just the nature of the beast, but they just have to stay the course until such time as they turn it around.
Well, look, that brings us around to the last game in the top flight, which is on this weekend, Murph. And the question is probably there now, are Dublin going to qualify for the semi-finals of the league? I know we were saying last week that maybe they might just edge ahead of Wexford and become one of the top 3 in the Leinster Championship. But despite a few caveats about the performance, Dublin beat Antrim in the end 28 points to 219. The worry for them will probably be there were 2 different stages where Antrim reeled off 5 scores in a row, and Antrim scored the last 1-5 of the game, which maybe masks the final result a little bit. But from a positive point of view, Mial Donoghue will be looking at this and saying 11 different scores. Donald Burke has sent over 10 points. We talked a bit earlier about some of the fantastic score taking he had from very difficult angles. And in truth, they were comfortable enough winners up until that final stage where Antrim had a bit of a goal push. Can Dublin get into the semi-finals of the league, Paul?
Yeah, they can, and they're actually probably one of the teams I would think that would be happy enough to be there. I think Neil Donoghue is looking at it. I could be wrong now, but the more games that he gets to play with this team and enforces his game plan on them, like in their young team as well, relatively young, like in terms of that they can probably take those few extra days on the road as well. But we were looking at them against Waterford last week, and a few indicators that we saw was that, okay, well, they know how they want to target their inside forwards, and they're moving the ball really well. And it's a little bit back to the old Dublin we used to see in terms that they're running the ball really well and they're coming at you. We saw more of it again at the weekend. And again, made Parnell Park look that old familiar thing of that little bit of a fortress. And look, that's not to be, saying, okay, Antrim had a bit more to do to really be competitive in this game. But Dublin did what they had to do. That was the important thing. And it's been things that we've been critical of Dublin over the last few years, and that they just looked off colour many days and you didn't know what they were about. But now we're starting to see that they do seem to know what they're about. And, Micheál Dunn was obviously an excellent manager, but he really seems to put a stamp on this team. And I think they are actually one team that would be happy enough to go to a semi-final. And that's not speaking for any other team, but they look like a team that the more matches they play together before championship, and this is all, as long as they don't pick up injuries and like Donald Burke and these lads, touch wood, don't get injured, he'll be happy enough doing that because they'll be compounding everything that they're doing. They'll be building on everything that they're doing. And I think Dublin kind of need that bit of confidence in a year after the last few years of kind of not really taking anything from most years over the last few years. I think if they got to a semi-final and came up against a really good team and potentially could get to a final, they could really build confidence over the next few weeks. I think they could prove to be, we talked about it last week, could be flying the ointment of a few teams this year. And it's great to have it because Dublin have always proved to be a really entertaining team to watch. And I just think whatever shape that Donoghue is putting on them at the moment, it seems to be working. And again, even touching back to about skill in the league, whoever wrote in the question there, if you stand back and look at this game, Antrim were performing really well. Like, they're really skillful. They were moving the ball really, really well. And if you were to stand back and take the score off the screen when you're watching it, there was actually kind of very little between these. It's just Dublin were that bit more clinical, and they were just that bit more polished than Antrim. But Antrim, and going back to what James was talking about previously, like, they have closed that gap consistently now, and are performing really, really well. And the likes of the Dunley boys back as well is a huge thing for them. But I just think that it's not to take away from Dublin. I just think they're really good performance against a good, solid Antrim team who did put a bit of a gloss on it at the end. But I think Dublin can be happy where they are. They're doing what they need to do. And look, I suppose Antrim don't want moral victories anymore or anything like that. They want to win games. But I have to give full credit to Antrim as well, because like they have closed this gap that we talk about with the big teams, and they just need to bring in a few more players, and the likes of Neil McManus and these to be able to rest the likes of him. That's what they need to do. But look, Dublin are happy where they are, and I think they're going to be building over on the next few weeks. They're really going to put in some good performances.
Yeah, the Dunley boys don't seem to have been affected. Colin Cunning and Keelan Malloy particularly hurling very well. They had to kind of dust themselves off very soon after the All-Ireland final and go straight back out with the county team. And Keelan Malloy particularly breaking from deeper positions, took his 2 goals really well during the game. And the feeling will probably be for them that the Laois game is the most important one for them in the league, to make sure that they get points there and that it's Laois who are playing in the relegation playoff as opposed to Antrim. For Dublin, Skehill, are you starting to see a bit of what you thought Micheál Donoghue was going to bring to them?
Glimpses of it, yeah, to be honest. Like, in fairness, they played Waterford in Fraher Field, tight parameters. They played in Hurling Park again, same thing, tight parameters. They're playing Tipperary in 2 weeks' time in Croke Park, and that will tell us an awful lot of where they're at. That'll tell me if the Dublin players are taking in what Micheál and his management team are trying to input onto them, because you're dealing with a far grander scale in the Croke Park pitch, where you take a hurling team as sharp at the moment as Tipperary, who have the ability to play around teams, and that'll tell you a lot where Dublin are at. There's potential here for Dublin to get bet, and possibly well bet by the way Tipperary are playing, but you're looking for the fundamentals of the way I don't know who team sets up, and that's aggressive in the backs, power ball coming out, and forwards playing with extreme confidence, shooting on sight, which we saw yesterday with Nowlan Park with some of the scores he produced. Shoot on sight. Like, what Micheál does is he puts great faith in the players' ability, their personal ability, what they can do. So I guarantee he's telling Donald Burke, if you get anywhere within stiff, take a shot, and if it goes wide, so be it. But keep keep hammering the hammer and it'll eventually come off. So again, what to your question, Will, seen a bit, a glimpse of it, but I'll know an awful lot more in 2 weeks when Tipp roll into Cork Park against them.
Right, both of you get your power rankings ready as to where we are now. I'm sure
I'm ready.
I was going to say the infamous Skehill notebook will probably come out in a second. So I did mine up before we started. Just to give you the results from Division 2A before we do that. Offaly beat Derry by 33 points to 115. Owen Cowell scoring 12 points off the bench. That game was a lot closer at half time. Offaly scored 20 points in the second half. So they've got 2 wins from 2. Same story for Kerry, who overcame Carlow by 18 points to 113. And Kildare have got 2 wins from 2 as well. A win against Down, who were the beaten finalists in 2A last year, by 117 to 19 points. So it sets it up interestingly. So you've got 3 teams now who are on 2 wins each, and you can't help but think at the halfway point of this division, it's probably going to be 2 out of 3 getting to the final. And perhaps one of the most important fixtures is going to come in the first round after the break, when Kerry will host Offaly, who are the top 2 currently on scoring difference. Power rankings then. I'm going to give mine, and then you 2 can work yours out afterwards. So number 1... I've got Limerick.
Hold on a second now. Sorry. Is this power rankings at present, or are we looking at championship or overall power rankings?
It's a bit of an overall. We can't do it just
for the overall.
The league table gives us the power rankings.
Thank you. I agree with you, because Murphy.
I'd agree with that. I mean, otherwise you'd be like Cork number 1, Tipperary number 2.
Okay, we're on the same page. We're on the same page.
So I think this is taking into account what we've seen in these first 2 weeks, plus where teams were at the end of last year. How's about that?
Perfect.
Right, so number 1, I've got Limerick. Number 2, Kilkenny.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. 3, I'm going Galway. So you can both be kind of happy that you're in the top 3 there. I've kept Clare in 4, despite the defeat against Limerick. 5, I've put Cork. 6, Waterford. 7, Tipperary. Even though I was tempted to put Tipp a little bit higher, it is still just 2 rounds that we're basing this on. Wexford are in 8th. Dublin in 9th. Antrim in 10th. Westmeath are 11. Laois are in 12, even though I think those 3 teams are very close. 13, Offaly. 14, Kerry. You can stick to Division 1 if you want, by the way. 15, Kildare. 16, Down. 17, Carlow. And 18, Derry. So that's the top 2 flights ranked in my power rankings. So I think I have to do an OTBM at some point this week as well. So wait for me to change them before I go on. Right. Paul, do you want to go first? Where are you ranking here?
I'll keep it very simple. I only have one change from that.
Ooh.
And this is just in the interest of brevity here. I have Cork ahead of Clare at the moment. I have them in 4th. I'm going to give them a bit of credit on their performances at the moment, and maybe temper with the fact that Clare finished off quite poorly last year as well. But other than that, I'm quite happy with what you said there, Will. Yeah.
Right, Skehill, you're going to rip this up now.
Not a question of your power rankings. Question of how high are Galway, and then go and justify it with the Welsh Cup. Go on.
Oh God! Oh, you smart arse. Right, I have. So we can all agree Limerick first.
Sure.
Okay, just about now.
Are you sure now? Are you sure, Scan? Right, you're going to go.
It's a big call.
If you can't decide Limerick first, we'll just end the podcast here. All right.
That's my final answer. Okay. Number 2, I'm sticking with Galway. Right, in the story. Number 3, I have Kilkenny. Number 4, I have Cork. Number 5, I have Clare. Number 6, I have Tipp. Number 7, I have Waterford. Number 8, I have Wexford. Number 9, I have Dublin. Number 10, I have Antrim. Number 11, I have Laois. Number 12, I have Westmeath. Number 13, I have Offaly. Number 14, I have Kildare. Number 15, I have Kerry. Number 16, I have Down. Number 17, I have Carlow. And number 18, I have Derry.
Right. Not like, in fairness, not a massive amount of difference here. We're talking about like Galway you have ahead of Kilkenny. So give us your argument for Galway being ahead of Kilkenny at this stage then.
Well, I'm just thinking, okay, overall. So I know, Murph, you pointed towards, Kilkenny getting the Ireland final, and I fully respect that. You know what I mean? I point towards Galway in the way they shaped up against Limerick as well. Now granted, Kilkenny beat Galway in the Leinster Championship last year. In the final, obviously, Galway beat Kilkenny in the group game. It's just like, it's fine margins. I like Galway's squad. You know what I mean? And again, I'm thinking about one eye on the games we have to go to. So we have to go to Kilkenny this year. That's a big one, you know what I mean? So we have to go to Kilkenny and go to Dublin. Obviously, we've Wexford coming to town. So this year is a tough one. Going to Nowlan Park is tricky, and that's when I really know where Galway and Kilkenny are at. You know what I mean? If we can go in and put a good performance there, and then it becomes judgment call, personal, opinions on where you envisage a team going. Do you know what I mean? Not where they are now. I know I've one eye in last year. Don't get me wrong, but I'm pointing to where I envisage, and I envisage Cork possibly getting better. So I've swapped 2 and 3 in your rankings. I swapped 3 and 4 or sorry, 4 and 5, excuse me, and I've swapped 6 and 7. You know, for where the potential they show and where I think they might get you.
Murph, what's your argument for having Cork ahead of Clare? Is that largely what we've seen so far, or do you think Clare's position was inflated last year? Give me your argument for putting them ahead of them.
I suppose it's the fine margins Skehill is talking about there. If Clare lost to Kilkenny by a point in the semi-final last year, I'd still probably have them where they are. But I'm just giving a bit of credit to Cork where they are at the moment. You know, they put in 2 really good performances. And I know we're trying to balance this out with being, you know, from last year and currently on teams' performances. But just, you know, Cork are tipping along very nicely at the moment. And with lots of those teams, like again, even Tipp and Waterford there, fine margins again, you know, tipping along nicely there as well, no pun intended. But it's, you know, there's lots, you could move that around quite a bit there, like, you know. So I just said for a bit of movement there, I liked what Cork were doing. And I think maybe the fact that we've been a bit hard on Cork over the last while, maybe not, but maybe I'm just feeling a bit soft there now this evening. I said I'd move Cork up that small bit. But I think the Clare fans might have something to say about that.
Yeah, why is it when I meet someone from Cork, geez, you hate Cork?
Well, you're wearing a Cork top there tonight, so like, I mean...
Well, I meet someone from Clare, geez, you hate Clare. I don't, like, it's just...
Right, hold on now. I had to take all the crap for both of you when Cork were playing Waterford in the league final last year. So I was covering a match for OTB, went down to the pitch to chat to the Down and Westmeath management after the Division 2A final. I was coming back up and I bumped into multiple Cork fans who were giving out about both of you being unfair on Cork. And one guy even said, "You're the only person on that podcast who's fair about Cork." And I'm like, I didn't actually say all that much about Cork, but maybe that's enough. Yeah, the Clare fans gave you a bit of slack last year, Skehill, didn't they, when their tails were up in the Munster Championship?
Do you know why? Because they didn't put Tony Kelly in the top 5 at the time.
Yeah, that
was ridiculous.
Or should I told you why I didn't put him in there, didn't I?
Yeah,
for finish.
Didn't make it right though. Like, you can tell us why. Like,
yeah. Well, I completely forgot about him. That's how.
I think it's Skehill. You just have a rough quality about you. You just, even when you're complimenting teams, it just sounds like you're being negative. I think that's what it is. Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you sound like my wife now, so you do.
Right, I'm going to be murdered for how far we're gone over time here, but I'll throw out one more question to you, which has come in from Evan Ahern, because Evan sends in messages most weeks with questions. So he has asked, are Robbie O'Flynn, Donald Burke and Jason Ford the 3 most underrated hurlers in Ireland? Paul, I don't know. I like, does anyone underrate Donald Burke and Jason Ford especially? Like, Robbie O'Flynn obviously is very much coming to the fore the last couple of years for Cork, but is there an argument to say these are 3 guys that should be rated higher?
No, I would have thought they're actually getting good credit at the moment for where they are. Like, they're good players. Donald Burke is probably, you know, Dublin's main player. He's the poster player really at the moment. The rest of the lads, I think they get good credit. I do understand what he's saying. Like, you know, like maybe on these days they're exceptional players on their day, but I suppose these players that get savage credit for consistently going out week on week, I think they get the deserved credit that they get. I mean, they're great players. Maybe just, I suppose, what he's touching on there is that he's felt they've been hard on over the years, but I just think they're excellent players. I think they get the credit. I think that's well known how good they are. So I think there's other players out there that probably would be more deserving of being underrated than those 3.
Who deserves the underrated tag here then? You can give me one each, or how's about that?
Underrated player. You have one, Skehill, ready to go? He doesn't.
I don't. I'm thinking hard now.
I was sure the Magic Notebook would have something written in there.
I don't think of an underrated player at the moment.
You see, when you think about top rated, it comes to straight away. You go Tony Kelly, you go Keane Lynch, you go Teacher Reid, easy. So when you say underrated in comparison to who? So see, like, if you're rated,
I think on Evan's argument here, maybe you'd say, right, that Jason Ford is possibly underrated because we all talk about Callanan as opposed to talking about him. And in Donald Burke's case, maybe before we used to talk about Crummy, or we would talk about, say, one of their teammates a little bit more than them. In Robbie O'Flynn's case, maybe we talk about Hoagie, or we talk about... Actually, on a total aside, did you see Patrick Horgan's tweet about the Super Bowl last night, which I thought was quite funny? He was saying they're going to have to make the ball yellow in the Super Bowl next year, or we won't be able to see it. That is a man who is on a determined campaign to make sure that the sliotar is white again. Before he goes, top scorer in championship history, he is going to make sure that the yellow-green sliotar is gone.
He doesn't tweet often, but when he does, it's usually about a yellow ball. That's to be fair to him.
Bloody hell. That's you're not going to let it go, that's for sure. Yeah,
I have one.
Go on.
I think Ever Quilligan's underrated.
He had a good save at the weekend as well, yeah.
I think he's underrated.
Well, what are his best assets as a goalkeeper then? If you're going to say he's underrated,
So his striking ability is class. So he can go both. He can go all ranges. He can go long, like can strike to the far 21 nearly, and he's a good range for short trajectory, and he makes good decisions. His shot stopping is very good, and his handling is excellent. He made one error against Tipperary the year before last, below on Thurles, which kind of people have associated with him for a while now, and it's like, you know, every goalie makes an error. They all make them. You know, Cummins, Murphy, all made errors. It's just the public sometimes have a habit of, you know, assign that error to the goalie more than they should. You know what I mean? So I think he's crucial to Clare. If you don't have him and his range of the tools at his locker, Clare aren't the same team, to be honest. So that's my pick. It's not a bad one, in fairness. I'm happy with
that. See, I think there's like a few years ago, if you asked, not that like players people would have said that Kevin Moran is underrated, but he would have been the type of player that I think any team in the country would have taken. Like it was an exceptional player. So every so often there's these players that just seem to be like putting in these unbelievable performances and not getting the credit. But at the moment, to be fair, you know, with the coverage there is, I don't think there's too many players that are slipping under the radar like that are really underrated. You know, I'd
have always said Kieran Joyce from Kilkenny. Was always one that, you know, he never, let's say, caught the limelight of the Kilkenny backs, obviously because who was around him, you know, but he was underrated.
About 3 years ago, I would have said Tommy Doyle from Westmeath, but the problem is now that everyone talks about how underrated Tommy Doyle is, that Tommy Doyle is now rated as a result of being underrated for too long, and so therefore he comes up in these conversations. But I think genuinely, if there was a transfer system within GAA and he could move to a stronger county, loads of teams would love to transfer him in and have him as their fullback.
Do you know who's a good player as well? Paddy Burke of Antrim. He's put in some savage performances. There's a player now as well. And maybe it's not so much underrated, just under the radar there, in that maybe not getting the coverage as much as other players. But he's another player that, from what I see of him, a cornerback, popped up with another point at the weekend.
Great against score, because he could easily have just gone, right, that's enough, I've passed the ball forward. He made another run for his teammate, and then a good finish as well.
And he scored 2 points against Kilkenny. He made 3 or 4 runs up the pitch anyway, driving it on. But there's another player in the vein of Tommy Doyle that, you know, just consistently puts in good performances. And I wouldn't say underrated, but just like I said, maybe just doesn't get to perform on the big days that those other players do.
I love that we had a goalkeeper and a cornerback that were picked as the players who are underrated. So
very fair.
Very, very fair indeed. But you pick where
that's our natural instinct and
that's why we're underrated. Free takers, they're not underrated. You know.
100%. Well, look, next week we have a bit of a break week. We still have a pod and we can look forward to the games which are coming up the week afterwards. And by all means, keep the questions coming in. We'll flick up a story on Instagram probably on Saturday of next week, which is now my day off, so it's the perfect time for me to stick it up. We'll take your questions and we'll have a chat through them. And also, if you have any other questions or comments you want to get in, stick them in the YouTube. It's live every Monday at 10 p.m. now on Off the Ball social channels. And the podcast should be up. Right now, Future Will is about to edit the podcast. It'll be up around about 7 p.m. this Monday because of how long we've talked for. But lads, it's been a pleasure as always, and we'll talk to you for episode 3 next week.
Thanks very much, lads.
See you guys.